They're busting unions in Wisconsin. We got mojitos by the pool. We got a talent for distraction, no reaction to the colic and the cruel. They're sinking battleships at midnight. We change the channel on a dime when they break to a commercial dress rehearsal in our catatonic prime. Time is moving on. There's no marching band, just some fuzzed out credits.
Hello here at Comic Sans, our video podcast, and a very warm welcome to you. Good to have you here, Greg Thompson.
Thank you so much. Danke.
You're in Europe this week? No, not this month. You're on tour?
For 3 months.
For 3 months. And there we have Mikael Ross, and who's also here because we have the book fair. That's the reason everybody comes here to this table. And later, of course, you go to the real book fair and wie heißt this? Promote your books. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Greg, you're a very small YouTube format, and you're our first really international superstar that we got in this format. So we're very grateful. Yeah,
like you named a bunch of who I think of as international superstars.
No, we're talking of sales. And now you have
that should never hear this.
And now you have to endure like 1 hour of our bad German English dialect.
No, so, much better than my German.
It's great that you're here.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be here. Thank you.
Maybe we start with this latest book, if it's okay, because in this format we don't have a special concept, we don't have a special structure to talk.
Okay.
But we are very interested in how you're doing comics and what your influences are and what you like and what you not like in the comic scene.
Okay.
Maybe we also can talk about agents today. I don't know. Sure. It's a question I have to the both of you.
That's a bit different, the US to Europe, right?
I guess so. I don't know so much about the American market, but yeah, we can also talk business, of course.
Yeah. Why not?
In fact, you asked about influences. Can I just dive in?
You can just dive in. I like to start with that, but
okay.
No, you're the master.
Well,
I like that format.
The biggest influence with this new book, Ginseng Roots, in comics is Joe Sacco, because I wanted to do a book of comics journalism, and Joe is the father, the master of comics journalism.
Maybe you can just open the book and show us on one page how he. What is impressive for you?
I mean, I love everything Joe does. I was pretty blown away by this new book. It's newish. I think he has a brand new book coming out in a month. We actually cover in some places some similar territory. Let's see if I can find it, because this is Joe writing about indigenous people and the oil sands, or what do you call it? Oh, here we go.
Okay.
He did a page about. Wow. All right, I'm not going to find it right now, but Joe was a major influence, and the reason I thought of the segue is because Joe is the one who convinced me to get a literary agent too, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So 2004 is when like Blankets was exploding, and I was wrestling with a lot of these professional decisions, and Joe was like, you need an agent to deal with, simple things like getting paid.
Yeah.
And so for me, and Joe said it at the time that it was the most important decision he made in his career, was getting a literary agent. That would apply for me too. Although we're in a different era now, 20 years later, because that was a real hungry era in American publishing, where all the New York literary presses wanted graphic novels, and they were offering big advances, and there was a lot of more legal contractual things to sort out. And that era has kind of calmed down since then. There's not the same sort
of... the heydays are over?
Yeah, the heyday is over in the US. Yeah, there was like a good decade there where
I remember when Mikael came and say, now I have an agent. It was, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And it's for German comic artists, it's something really new, I guess.
Yeah, because
is that true?
You have to get accepted with your crappy German comic art, so it's difficult for us, I think, still. Because our market is so small, and then to work with an agent, like for them to accept you as an artist, like
so it's not so easy to find one.
I think it got more difficult. Again, like there were a lot of eager agents 20 years ago, and now there aren't a lot of agents representing graphic novels or comics.
Okay,
that was an era.
And is also the link between the film industry and the comics is also a matter of agents? Is it something your agent also deals with, or?
No, I have a separate agent, entertainment agent in LA for that. I do remember in 2004 when I was considering this question of having an agent, because it sounded daunting at the time because you have to give a big cut. I feel like 15% of your income goes to an agent. So you're like, oh, that's a lot of money over time. Or it could be if you, but then it ends up being worth it. But I talked to Neil Gaiman at that time, and I mean, he's a superstar, so he had like a whole team, and that's the thing he said. He's like, oh, I have a whole team. I have a literary agent, I have a Hollywood agent, I have tour agent, I have this agent. So that's a whole different level. But eventually I did. Yeah. So but at a certain juncture, I did get also a Hollywood agent, just because that's even a messier. It's just like legally so messy with those contracts, and you can lose a lot of your rights, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not that especially in the comic scene, we don't have also a big history of people losing their rights to their property.
With the comic scene, the question is more getting paid, and like an agent kind of works like a bulldog to shake money down from the tree, you know.
Yeah.
and they can be the bad cop, you know, because like I don't want to think too much about the fact that I'm not getting paid for book sales. Yeah. But that's the agent's job.
Yeah, and the scene in Germany, in my opinion, you can correct me, is very close together, and it's kind of offensive if you have an agent. Do you not trust me anymore?
It does sound like a douchey American.
Yeah, and to be the bad guy is really helpful, I guess, for comic artists to have a wall or a distance.
I think as an artist, you're not prone to be a good businessman. Like, why would these qualities land in one person at the same time? So often I feel like, sometimes we're a good artist, and then we really don't have a good sense for business and for contracts, and that's not our field. And then to have someone in the field that takes over that work, that reads the contracts, that writes the contracts.
I feel like comics festivals are inherently awkward too, because like the cartoonist is expected to deal their own books and handle the money. And so you go to a festival, and when the artist is running their own table, and you know you want to look at their book, but you have to look at it right in front of the artist, who might be really vulnerable and sensitive about it. But then also you're exchanging money, and I don't like that. Like I guess I feel very spoiled having a publisher run the table, and I can meet the readers and I can draw on the books, but I don't have to deal with the commerce side, which seems awful, and it's just really hard to combine those things at the same time.
But coming back to Joe Sacco,
Joe.
Why is he such a influence, such a impressive guy for you as an artist?
Well, I've kind of just wanted to emulate his example as a comics journalist, writing something that's a nonfiction, research-driven, interview and documentary-driven. Unlike Joe, Joe has a degree in journalism, and he goes to war zones and gets embedded with other journalists and troops, and you know, I don't want to go to that extreme, but I did want to do something that was just research driven. You know, those are the kind of prose books I like to read. The other big influence for Ginseng Roots was Michael Pollan. He's a food science and botany writer in the U.S. He writes about plants. And I'm like, I want to do just a book about plants, you know? It's like a genre of comics I hadn't had a chance to explore yet, the more documentary phase of the medium.
Yeah. And now you have it in your hand. This is also an interesting fact that this edition, it arrived today, 3 hours ago, with the postman, but it isn't published yet
in the
United
US.
States. Maybe you tell us why.
Yeah, can you give us this?
Well, yeah, it comes out
the
next next spring in the U.S. in 2025. The main reason is because of the American election season. So for 3 years ago, we were already on a time schedule, and my publisher is like, "Well, we can't release. Spring is too soon of 2024 to finish all the production, and fall is impossible because we have the elections." And unless you're doing a book that's overtly political, you're not going to get any reviews or media attention. So they're like, that's just impossible for a book being published this fall. So they moved it to spring. And the other reason is America, and this is about globalization. And we don't do any printing locally. It's all done in Asia. And that takes a long time for those shipments to move back and forth overseas. Whereas Germany probably prints, if not in Germany, pretty close in proximity.
We print pretty much a lot is printed in Poland.
Yeah, there you go.
Czechia.
So
Czechia is,
you're keeping the printing process a lot more local, and that keeps it a lot more streamlined.
Europe is one country for
Tell us what the book is about.
It's about 10 years of my childhood working in ginseng cultivation. Ginseng is a root, a medicinal herb used in Chinese medicine. A lot of Westerners aren't familiar with it. A lot of people get it confused with ginger, which is that spicy root you use.
Which I did first when I started reading it.
I guess they're similar in the sense that they're both roots.
and they have both a very funny shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do it's like a comic character.
Yeah.
Both of them,
Yeah, the other one is
anyway.
the mandrake root, which is in Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, or in Harry Potter. It's the root that comes alive and anthropomorphized.
Yeah, doing some strange noise. Yeah.
But ginseng is like one of the second most important herbs in Chinese medicine after the reishi mushroom. And it just so happens that the tiny town I grew up in America, in Wisconsin, in the middle of nowhere, Marathon, Wisconsin, population 1,200 people, was the biggest producer of cultivated American ginseng in the world when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, I was working in those gardens because that was a working class kid, and that's how I was able to afford any disposable income, which was all spent on comic books.
You make it very clear in this story that 1 hour of hard work means one comic book.
Which seemed great to us.
And it's much more than just this superficial relation between the money and the thing you bought. It's much more because, in my opinion, because this relation between physical work or maybe real work and the artistic work of a comic artist is always an issue in your whole reflections. You still sometimes seems to think it's not a real work it's not a real job to be a comic artist, and real work must be physically challenging. And
well, I have insecurity on both ends of the equation. As on one hand, I just feel like, I'm too privileged. Like people are out there, like my father, who was a plumber, are doing like real work, like back-breaking, sweat of the brow labor. And I just get to hide in my studio and just, fiddle with cartoons. It seems like easy labor in contrast. On the other hand, I have insecurity being working class, coming from working class background. I didn't grow up with much culture. I never went to university. I don't have education. So I'm inhabiting, cultural spaces now of artists and academics, but I feel unqualified.
I think it's pretty well summed up in this 1.5 pages, because it tells, when I read this 1.5 pages, I was like, hey, you're in this 1.5 pages, you give me the full picture of where you come from, how you approach work, what's your work ethics, and how your path was. And it's so efficient in this, the book is very long, but in this page, it's so efficiently done to come to the point, okay, that's how I work and that's how I operate.
Thank you.
And especially this last panel really hit with me, because I think that's all. I mean, we've got a lot of viewers that are comic makers, and I think this will resonate a lot with a lot of us. This, all these doubts and the judgment we get from our families to our work, and that we're always somehow in between chairs.
Yeah, and also captured here is a third insecurity, which is the fact that I didn't worry about it when I was a kid, but as an adult, I feel a bit of resentment that I never had vacations as a child. I worked 40 hours a week when I was a child. And so now, looking back, I feel like I missed out on this important aspect of childhood, leisure, learning to do something other than work. And on that page, I show how it wasn't until my 30s that I actually learned to have any leisure in my life.
It was the time when you going to France and
and it was basically once blankets took off and I started to have some career success, I finally had enough income where I could take the weekends off, or I could go on a vacation, or I could even drink alcohol. I didn't drink alcohol in my 20s because I was so poor. And I mean, that's one of many examples, but like I didn't have that kind of discretionary spending. I was like pinching every penny. So in my 30s, I learned to like relax a little more and be a human being. But by the time I hit my 40s, then I was feeling like I was losing some part of my work ethic, because it was just making comics just felt like work to me, and I was taking it for granted, but I was tired of it.
There's so much to say about this book. Also, in combination or in relation to your other work. So maybe we can cover some of the aspects and just dive in. For example, I was very happy with this book and my son.
It's our camera.
It's Space Dumplings.
Okay.
And it's a easygoing science fiction story for kids, for older kids, I would say. Not so easygoing because it's also there are a lot of ecological problems out there in space, and if you take a closer look, especially for to the machines, which will be shown there, it's not prepared. Maybe you can show us. You will see there is a very, very strong relation.
Yeah, I can think of one machine you might be speaking of here in the last chapter, or one of the final chapters. It's a tractor inspired. Where? I can't even find my way through my own book. Too many pages. Here we go. That is inspired by growing up around tractors.
And I had the feeling, because I read them close to each other, that it's a different audience, it's a different story, but the conflicts of your family, they are somehow also in this book. It's also about class, it's about wealth, poverty, what is dirty work, what is
oh, you're right, it's
like
the same
design
things.
work. It's like so much relates in these two books.
Yeah, the book is inspired by real life friends and their kind of family dynamic. They had a little daughter born named Violet, and I really wanted to make a book to dedicate to Violet.
Yeah, that's the name of the main character here. Yeah,
but within the family, I saw like social class dynamics played out between working class backbreaking work and more privileged fashion design work and. You're right. It's the same themes. It's a very personal work. There's a lot of Wisconsin in it too.
The family that it's based on is also they are Wisconsians.
My buddy who is the father in the book. We originally met when we were teenagers in Wisconsin. We all live in the Pacific Northwest now. He's in Washington, and I was living in Oregon until a couple months ago.
Yeah, well, that's related.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, those don't look dissimilar.
Yeah, and it's really fantastic because it works so well in outer space, and there are what you say. It's the same problems out there. You have some garbage. You have lots of garbage. It's everything is spoiled by exploding whales, and it's also this book brings also very many ecological issues on the table.
That's in all my books too.
Yeah. But going back before we talk maybe about your family and the concerns, the interesting thing is that this book wasn't published in that form. Mm-hmm. Maybe you tell us something about the process, because it's very interesting. It brings us back to the comic books you bought as a child.
Yes, exactly. So for a number of reasons, I was not so excited to work in graphic novel format again. Mm-hmm. The main reason is, this book took me 8 years, so I didn't want to hide in isolation for nearly a decade,
Mm-hmm.
Like you did with Habibi, basically.
Yes. Yeah, and then you release the book 8 years later, and it might fall flat on its face, or get torn apart by critics, and people might be like, "Oh, why did you make this book? We did not want this."
And you say goodbye
and
to the ideas.
I just lost a decade of my life. So that was part of my fear, and then the other is I've just had like a midlife crisis with comics, where it just hasn't been fun for me anymore. Mm-hmm. So as with Space Dumplings, welcome Kumo, I wanted to figure out how to get back to the way comics felt for me as a child, mm-hmm. like when the medium imprinted on me, mm-hmm. And so I've never worked in comic book format, and by that I mean 30-page mm-hmm. newsprint pamphlets, mm-hmm. which are disposable.
Basically, that's the superhero format, right?
That was the only format that existed until the mid-90s or something.
And it's $5 to buy, or $6 each issue.
Yep, exactly.
So what happens exactly? You plan it, the whole thing in 12 volumes, or you already got a master plan?
No, the 12 was sort of arbitrary, but I was like, 12 issues seems like the right number mm-hmm. for a series. Mm-hmm. And then I came up with an outline, mm-hmm. but then I only worked on one chapter at a time, mm-hmm. beginning, middle, and end, mm-hmm. print, mm-hmm. and then start working on the second chapter. Mm-hmm. So usually I'm thinking of a book more holistically. Mm-hmm. I'll thumbnail the entire book, and by thumbnail I mean like do a loose storyboard of the entire book for a year or two before mm-hmm. I start the final art.
Okay.
But this one I was only thinking one chapter at a time.
And then each chapter got published by yourself, or was there already a publisher?
In the US, I was working with Uncivilized Books, which is a small publisher run by Tom Kaczynski, an amazing cartoonist himself, and he's in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And he had done a couple, he was publishing Gabrielle Bell's work in that sort of what you might call mini comic format. Mm-hmm. And so seeing what he was doing, loving Gabrielle's work, I reached out to Tom and we discussed doing a series. He hadn't done any series, but I think since then he did a series with Noah Van Sciver, and he's done a few comic series now.
Yeah, and did this plan that you've had, I will not go into this risk of doing a large book for 10 years and then not knowing what the outcome is. Did this actually work with the comic books? Is this the thing to do?
No, it's not the thing to do. It did not work. One, you don't make money, there isn't indie comics aren't selling a lot in that format. Mm-hmm. It was funny because the very first issue came out, I was at TCAF in Toronto doing a signing side by side with my brother. There were there's people waiting in the line 2 hours before I got to the table.
Really?
And the first guy in line, he had blankets with him, but I was like, oh, this is the first issue of my new thing. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, I'll wait for the graphic novel. But this is
you're gonna wait 5 years.
This was 2017, and I was like,
okay.
I was like, it's gonna be a while before there's a graphic novel.
Okay.
In the end, it's 8 years. He'll have to wait. Yeah. Then we're right here, right now. We'll sign a copy for you. No, I'll wait for the graphic novel. So that was the general attitude: is people really aren't that interested in that format. And I thought it might have more appeal for the same reason it appeals to me. There's something so unassuming about a comic book, and it's only $5, so it's not a huge.
But that might be really a socialization thing that you grow up with a medium of that size and you have a special place in your heart for it.
Nostalgia.
And then other people are what do you want? It's too short. That's not what I want.
Yeah.
People are really, I think they love their formats. Yeah. And for example, I'm also, because I didn't grow up with that kind of format, I'm also not drawn to it. I'm drawn to the album format, for example. Yeah. And younger people, they don't even know the album format. So it's a real And I'm always, because I'm the last months I thought a lot about these risks of doing long books, and of course there's also risk of doing short books, and it's always to find this middle ground.
Sweet spot, yeah.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
Well, the series, it didn't sell great, and it didn't get great press. It actually got it did get an Eisner nomination, which is awesome.
That's right.
But that Eisner nomination might
In which category?
As series.
Series.
Yeah, it didn't win, but that might actually hurt it when it comes out as a graphic novel. Now people will be like, oh, it's not a graphic novel because it was a series first, so it can only qualify as a collection. So that's kind of lame. And they're not really related. They're actually quite different because this.
Oh, it's not the same.
There's 60 more pages of story material in the graphic novel, and overall there's like, oh boy, there's a lot. There's 90 pages more material. But basically I finished this series last fall, 2023. Sat down and read issues 1 to 12, and I wasn't happy with it.
Okay.
No.
Why not?
Because I was just thinking of it, chapter by chapter, and I didn't feel like it held together as a whole. I felt like there was some sort of narrative arc that was missing. It didn't have... They each worked individually. They didn't work cohesively. So then I spent a whole year rethinking the whole book and adding a lot more story.
Okay, because now it works brilliantly.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's because you think so many things happen. For example, the trouble you got with your hand.
And that wasn't in the series at all.
Yeah.
My hand trouble. That's the biggest addition.
Maybe you can tell the audience 1 minute about that. And,
that might be a good page. But yeah, so that's what I decided was the connecting thread was my health crisis with my drawing hand. I was reluctant to put it in the book because I didn't want it to seem whiny. Like oh, look at me, I have this health problem. But yeah, I mean, thank you. And I realized everybody has something, everybody has some health crisis, major or small.
Yeah.
And even if you're perfectly healthy, we all live through a pandemic together.
That's true.
So I realized that health crisis is very universal. And it really was, it became more and more of an issue as I worked on the book. And then, amazingly, I ended up working with a Chinese medicine practitioner for my hand.
Yeah.
But it's weird because I had done days and days of interview footage with him. Here we go. Where did we start our...
There is a double page where you...
Yeah, I think it's right at the beginning of this chapter where we were doing our acupuncture treatments together.
Yeah.
But originally I was just interviewing him. And I had all these hours of interview footage, and I didn't know what to do with them. But then once I decided, I'm going to put my my health journey in here, it allowed me to take all that interview footage and apply it to my acupuncture treatments I was receiving, and then he started working with me as a patient and actually organically prescribing ginseng for me. So it's funny. It's funny. If I were writing it myself or if I was making it up, that's what I would have made up. But it happened in real life.
Yeah.
So
I think it's not whiny, but it's something special because if you see a comic artist with such skills talking about his hand and the damage of his hand, and the question is, can he draw anymore? It's really something. Yeah, it's really dramatic.
It's the base of all your income.
Yeah.
I mean, again, a lot of comic artists here in our audience. Everybody has this fear of his tools, and the hands are our tools that we rely on. And also, everybody has issues with them because drawing is not healthy.
Yeah, repetitive motions.
As we're already here, can you spread some wisdom for the comic artists, for their hands and their necks?
Yeah, well,
what do you do?
Speaking of
stools,
there's a book that Uncivilized publishes in the US, but I can't think of the artist right now, called Drawing Stronger, which is specifically physical therapy, exercises for cartoonists to strengthen your back and your wrists. And so that's a great book to look up. I'm sorry, I can't remember
We're gonna put
the author's name, but the book is called Drawing Stronger. And yeah, early in my career, before I was even a professional, I was working. My last real job was working as a graphic designer for Dark Horse Comics. So I would work my 40-hour work week at the computer back when we still used a mouse, and then every night and every weekend I was drawing comics, and that's all I did is work. And I got really bad tendonitis at the time, which is a very common affliction in your wrist. A lot of cartoonists have that.
We all know what it is.
And the main issue was I was overworking, and then also I was doing no exercise, other than some skateboarding and jogging.
Oh, but
I was doing nothing.
It's really risky.
It's very risky, and I actually stopped skateboarding recently for that reason. Too high risk, because of my. But basically, once I started doing some minimal strength exercises, it started to, like, I never had tendonitis ever again. Okay. So as long as you're doing some push-ups, I think you can overcome tendonitis.
What's your weekly training schedule?
Well, it's been terrible on this weekly training.
Let's say not ideal weeks.
I mean, but yes, I think stretching's number one. Okay. You know, like basic yoga, sun salutations are going to help with the back issues. And the rotator cuff, the shoulder. So yeah, stretching is good for the back and the rotator cuff, and then any kind of strength things for the wrists, I suppose. And this not working 80 hours a week, which was always my issue.
80 hours
and I'm not capable of it now as a almost 50-year-old.
Yeah. And is there things that you would recommend to the artists hand-wise, like what to really avoid as tools or as setups? Like, what is there some specific stuff you like to stay away from that?
No, I mean, I really liked having a standing desk, and it was the kind where I could be sitting part of the day and then standing part of the day. That was good for me.
That's a very good...
So if I ever have a studio again, I want that desk again.
Yeah, they help a lot.
I do think, and just moving the position, you know? That's the dream setup, is like a standing desk that you can adjust.
I like to ask you a thing about one scene which moves me the most when I read it first, if you don't mind. Most of you're getting famous with blankets, and blankets really shows the background of your family, the fundamental Christian background. I hope I find the place now. When you first come back to your parents.
That's chapter 2. I was like, that's probably what it is. Here's where I land.
And the bookshelf.
Okay, it's coming up here.
And this is very, very interesting also on a sociological perspective, how you describe your parents, because I think you give a lot of thoughts about it, because you ask them, is it okay if I'm doing this and that, and I've been making a biographical comics, and them, okay, you can do that. And they're still fundamental. They're still not very progressive when it comes to ecological problems. And they still have no cultural stuff in the apartment, in the house, like maybe cool records.
No. They
videos,
got no secular music.
Yeah. The only thing they have beside their these, you see it here in the shelf, are your books. And these books are very critical towards their way of life. That was really moving for me. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Are they proud of it?
Yeah, they are, which is crazy. Blankets came out 20 years ago, and my parents were not happy with the book, and they were not happy for at least 5 years. It was like a thorn in the side of our connection. But now it's 20 years later, and it feels like they've integrated and accepted the work, and by approximation sort of accepted some part of me. And Habibi was the first book I remember them actually liking.
But it's very erotic.
Well, which is crazy. Yeah, this is the edgiest of all my books. It has Islam, it has sexual trauma. But this was the first book they liked. that I made.
And you think one reason is that it's so a big book, it's so much work, much labor, it's so heavy, or is it just a strange guess from my side? It looks like a Bible.
You know, I've never actually pressed them. I'm a little scared because I'm like, why do they like that book?
Okay.
And I think it's actually it might be a really personal reason that you know, like there was a lot of like a history of sexual trauma in my family, and so people read this book and they're like, oh, that's just a fairy tale, but I'm like, oh, it's actually a very intensely personal book that I had to process some really dark, you know, family trauma, and so maybe they found that resonated with them.
I mean, I sometimes have also the feeling that in a very not open way in families there is stuff going on with like that children fulfill unlived dreams of parents sometimes. And
my parents did not want to be artists.
And it's not on the surface at all.
Okay.
But then at some point you discover that when they were children or something that they drew. But it was completely forgotten.
Yeah.
And
well, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, because that's also similar to my parents' home. So when I saw this, it's like there is something strange going on when the kids do art and the parents don't, and then these books make it in the house and they're somehow proud of it. But they also, it's weird. It always puzzles me these things.
Yeah. You know, yeah, we were in one of these households where the only book in the house was the Bible, which is why I do books that size. Because it's just like, it's organic shape to me. I read the Bible as long as I worked in the ginseng.
From the side. So.
Well, I mean, Habibi is really a beast, but
it's kind of ausgeschalten. Juice.
Okay. So Habibi's 666 pages, and
it's apocalyptical.
Yeah, and Ginseng Roots is 448. But yeah, I do make these Bible-sized objects.
Maybe I can surprise Mikael with one question at this point. You're not into autobiographical comics, and I guess this is a decision you made until now. And you're the opposite. Every comic is related, and you do the cahiers from your travel to Europe and blankets. And I know that you like the comics, but.
And that's what I want to correct you. I'm very into autobiographical.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just I would never dare to do that.
Really?
And that was my question that I had on the train. Was like, you talk very openly about your family and about your family history is always so. Then you're vulnerable because you give this information to the public. And how do you deal with being that vulnerable? And in public, because when a book is out, it's out. Then the critics read it, then attacks come, and I mean, in the publishing world that we're living now, in the cultural climate, these attacks can be very violent, also.
Yeah.
And where do you take how do you brace yourself for that?
Well, first, I think my biggest influence in comics is Chester Brown, actually. Blankets was heavily influenced by I Never Liked You, that memoir about his childhood and about his mother's deteriorating mental health. It's really just a book about an awkward teenager that doesn't know how to communicate with other people.
Yeah.
And it's so vulnerable and intimate and strange. And that was probably number one book to influence Blankets.
It's the story where the boy do not curse.
Yes. Yeah. What's it called in German? The title. Because the original title. Are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Chester's original title when it was serialized was just "fuck," because he couldn't swear as a kid.
It's a name in German.
Okay. Well, they could not. So they published a book with that title.
Yeah.
Which is funny if you watch that movie American Fiction about But yeah, so they couldn't market that title in the U.S. But it is kind of a great title. And then the rest of Chester's catalog strangely influential too. You know, he did the Gospels. He was drawing the Gospels in the back of Yummy Fur. That sort of influenced me, wanting to draw Jesus and Bible stories, both in Habibi and in Blankets. He did his crazy book about his experiences as a John with prostitutes.
Yeah, that's a crazy one.
Yeah, it's such a weird book. It's like, I don't quite get it. I don't understand Chester as a person, but I do find it captivating as a reader. Like it's there's some voyeuristic curiosity about it. Like this is a life I would not live myself, and so it's so interesting to inhabit it as a reader. So I don't know if I derailed your original question, because there's something about Chester's a great role model.
Chester goes in such a extreme direction always when he reveals stuff about his personal life. You don't have these very extreme stuff in your books that you reveal, but they're very, I have to think they're even more personal, because also it's so much about your family. And I mean, in Ginseng also, it's parts of it felt almost like an addendum to Blankets.
Yeah. Well, you know, I still don't know how I feel about autobiography, because Blankets came out 20 years ago, and I've been saying this on tour, but like I always have gotten pressure from publishers and readers, like, oh, we want Blankets too. Like, what would that even be? But for me, I was like, no, I don't want to repeat myself, and I don't know if I want to go down that path. There's a lot of pitfalls with doing autobio and hurting people's feelings. So I deliberately, you know, went to fiction with Habibi, a fairy tale, and then with Welcome Krumel, a sci-fi comedy.
You like the German title, yeah?
Yeah, it's a great title. Yeah, I mean,
it's with an umlaut, so it's
yeah, and it sort of makes sense in German. Title.
It's good.
So, but then I almost reluctantly ended up back with autobio, because initially I really just wanted to write about ginseng, because I think ginseng is fascinating enough on its own, and because there's this instinctual little character I could draw. It's like, well, I have my character, my protagonist, but readers weren't interested. They were interested in the personal aspect, so I realized I had to lean into that. Also, on a cultural level, I had to lean into my personal story, because you asked about attacks. You know, Habibi has been heavily criticized in the U.S. as being cultural appropriation, which is just basically the idea that you're not allowed to write about cultures that aren't your own. And what right did I have as a white WASP guy writing about Islam or, you know, Arabic culture? And so that same criticism plagued this project. People thought I was repeating the same crime and writing about Chinese culture or exploiting Chinese culture. But they're definitely missing the point of the book, which is like, no, this is about my childhood working in ginseng cultivation, which just happened to be a problem.
About your trips to go there and check it out, and it's a lot of space for the people from Laos, for example. It's really it's a whole story. It's one.
It's two chapters of the story of them among the organs.
Yeah. Maybe we can jump into some other field, because time is running. We already.
I think also in Germany we're only a bit protected against this cultural appropriation thing, because we cannot say the word. It's very difficult to say.
Oh, okay.
So it's not that's maybe why it's not such a big topic.
Yeah, what's the German version of that word?
Even the German version we cannot really say. It's too complicated to say it. Kulturelle Appropriation.
Aneignung. Kulturelle Aneignung. Yeah. We had a lot of discussions about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to end maybe on ginseng, I also feel it puts some parts of Blankets also in a time perspective.
Yeah.
Like, this is my childhood. This is how you felt at the time to talk about it, and I think it gives so much justice to your parents also and to your siblings to show them now and how they changed in the meantime. And how they developed also, and I think I would say it's not Blankets part 2, but it's really like a closing chapter on Blankets, I have the feeling.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I like what you said, and
Especially with the story of your sister that I found really moving. Because we are also three siblings, and I could imagine like leaving one sibling out of the story.
yeah,
And I really liked how you brought her in the book, and that she gets also to say her opinion, and that also her perspective is shown, like how she related to that work in the fields and how different it was for her.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I started Blankets, at first I was trying to fictionalize everything, and then that fell away because I realized it just made more sense to be autobiographical. But my sister really didn't have much of a role in the book or even in my childhood. And so it just became easier to just edit her out of the book. And I remember talking with her at the time, like, hey, I'm doing this book about her family, but you're not in there. And she's like, oh, good. Then I don't have to worry about, how I'm represented. So she claimed at the time that it didn't bother her, but it was still like a weird omission that I corrected with Ginseng Roots by right away addressing that of like, well, how did you feel about not being in Blankets? Which I didn't think anyone would see that book. I didn't think it would define me, but it has, and it is all true, but there's a lot of fiction in the fact that so many things are carved away and edited out of it.
And the book's not the same book if it's sold 3 million times. It's like the sheer success of the book made it a different book also, I think.
Yeah.
Because it became a different milestone in your career.
Yeah. And then also when I started Ginseng Roots, I started from the place of my own memories working in ginseng. Then I reached out to my siblings to fill in the gaps. And the first thing I learned is that my sister worked in ginseng and I'd forgotten. Because she only worked for like a year or two, and then she hated the work so much that she got out. She babysat instead. And I learned that my sister has the best memory of everyone in the family.
Oh, okay.
Like, my mom has no memory.
Yeah, this is also very moving. I don't have any
memory
about your childhood.
Yeah, and I have no sense of where my mom came from. Because once my family became born-again Christians, they kind of divorced from their families. Mm-hmm. So I didn't grow up with grandparents. I didn't grow up with relatives. And I never heard a story of my mom's childhood and where she came from.
Okay.
So there's no...
Until now, still...
Even now, you can extract only the tiniest details. I almost feel like working on this book started to trigger some memories for her.
Okay.
But my brother says he's similar to our mom, that he doesn't really hold on to memories. Mm-hmm. They sort of slip away. And I have this almost desperate need in my work to preserve memories. And it might come from the fact that my mom doesn't have them. That I'm like, I want to pin them down. I want to draw stories about memories.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You first?
I will change the matter.
Okay.
If it's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, because we're now running out of time a little bit.
Okay.
We were not limited, but we have a public appointment.
Oh, damn.
Later.
Okay, yeah.
And I saw this interview you have with Duitan, I don't know the name, the guy 2 years ago. About
yes, of course.
And he's a nice guy. I like the interview, and you talk about mini comics as a major influence to your work. And if you see, you especially mentioned John Porcelino's King Cat, which is a little familiar.
Another big influence on Blankets too.
Yeah, for German readers. But to be honest, if you see this style, it's not exactly what we found in Ginseng Roots, because your style is different. And you discuss it in, I quote that, I wrote it down. You said there is a delicate line between lazy drawing and virtuosic drawing. I like that sentence very much. And then you add that you're sometimes missing not to be the lazy draw. And lazy draw is not a bad thing, because you mentioned Sompe, for example.
Yes.
So maybe you can tell us, you still familiar to these categories, lazy drawing?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say lazy drawing. I would say there's a lot of comics that are lazy drawing, that it almost feels a little disrespectful to the reader. labor a little more over your drawings. I think the pleasure of comics is like the first read you read pretty quickly for the story, and then you go back and savor it for the drawing. So I think it's out of respect to the reader that you spend the time making the drawings and making them, I don't know, aesthetically pleasing. But no, I envy the great expressive loose artists like Joan Sfar, like Sempe, Charles Schultz, people who can do it with simplicity and like expressiveness, and then they're not fussing and laboring over everything. It just feels natural. So, and blankets is probably the closest I had to that because I was drawing it rather quickly, and I'd like to get back to that spontaneity. I don't.
Is there a way
lazy
back?
drawing is not the right term. It's more like spontaneous drawing.
Yeah, and is there a way back?
Great question. I don't know. I want to figure it out. Yes.
Because we had that discussion with Nicolas Mahler. I don't know if you know him from Vienna.
Of course.
And he was more and more into Japanese stuff and in this art of he has this.
He basically changed to brush, also to brush, and said to follow these Japanese brush drawings that have the Zen paintings of a frog or of a circle.
In one move. And,
where the whole aim or the philosophy behind this is like to do very little actually, and to do it in a very deliberate manner, like you go for it and then you leave it.
I think Edmond Baudouin is good at that, who's a big influence on me too, the French master. He draws in a way that is kind of, he's breathing when he draws. It's very interesting to watch him. He'll take a big breath.
Yeah,
he draws with
he
breath.
once signed a book for me, and he was very old.
He's 82 now, or maybe
and it was I didn't realize this breathing, but
sometimes it seems labor, but it also feels very like it's like he's doing Tai Chi or something when he's drawing.
Yeah, maybe it's a form. But I mean, you have this very elegant brush line, which I think a lot of artists envy you because it's so lush and it frankly looks so good. I also saw on your Instagram account that you do a lot of, or there's some posts of figure drawing and drawing after a model. Is this something that you consider important for your drawing?
Well, I've stopped it. I haven't drawn from life for 3 years, or at least, about 3 years. So on Instagram, I have drawings of my friend Miriam, and we've done drawings together for 20 years. Just friends, and we started doing drawings in the year 2000. And I think I would like to release a book of, there's hundreds of pages of those drawings. But I kind of lost the practice because of all the criticism I was getting in the US around my work. And one of them was that people found those drawings to be objectifying of the female form, which is ridiculous also because this is a friend of mine that I have a 20-year collaboration with as like a artist and model. So it's like the opposite to me, objectification, but so I kind of broke the habit, and I need to get back to it because I think life drawing has been a really important influence on my comics.
Yeah, I mean, I see it always in all of your hands and feet, and I mean they're all always in the right position. They behave naturally, and I think that's something that comes from the practice, from the regular practice of seeing it.
It's probably when I enjoy drawing the most too, because like drawing a comics page is just so much labor and it's claustrophobic and you can get so much information in there. But like when you're just drawing from life, that feels more meditative. It feels like you're being really present in a moment. It's like I'm here right now, looking and translating that into drawing. It feels very like a pure form of drawing.
Yeah. And do you have a drawing routine right now when you're traveling through Europe?
I haven't really drawn this year because back in the US I was working on book production and that consumed months and months. Every book, the amount of production I do because I'm doing all the graphic design myself and I'm redrawing things for foreign publishers, and there's so much back and forth. That's all I've done back in the US, and then I started the book tour 6 weeks ago, and I've been drawing in books, but that's not really drawing.
Yeah.
That's almost like you find drawings that are like a form of like your signature.
Yeah.
But I also did start a little notebook, and it's not like my carnet de voyage where I'm drawing buildings and architecture, but I am making notes and sketches of ideas for future books.
I mean, I also have the feeling that with in our last interview with Blach, like I was really surprised to meet an artist that never stops drawing. That he doesn't have his phases of like where he doesn't draw. He always, it's like a daily thing, no matter what.
He's a better person.
No matter where he is. And I don't function that way. Like I've also like books finished. I don't touch basically a page of paper for sometimes a year and a half, because I can't. I literally I have to. I can't.
Yeah.
And then it's at one point it comes back again. And then the book's finished, and I want to continue, but there's no book to finish. So what you do, and you lose again your hand for it.
Yeah. I always say that like it takes 3 days of drawing to get in a little bit of a rhythm, and it takes 3 months of drawing for the pages to be any good. And and it was really hard to find 3 months of working straight during this project. So, but I don't really like my pages until I have like 3 months solid of drawing, mostly every day.
Yeah, it's almost then after such a time, then your drawing starts to hum a little bit, and things start working that normally don't work.
That's a good way to describe it.
Do you have because I mean your main tool is still the brush, right? For comic artists, maybe as I want to pick up the brush and do more brush work and get maybe away from nib or from digital drawing. Can you give me a short wrap of like what brush are you using, what ink are you using, what paper, and how to use a brush?
I use just the standard number 3 watercolor brush, Sable watercolor brush, like a Raphael or a Winsor Newton, which I think are the comic standards, you know. Whatever I can get my hands on, but I destroy brushes. Unfortunately, you hear about like Milton Caniff or Will Eisner making a brush last 20 years. I can barely make a brush last a couple of months because I guess I abuse them. I use them for dry brush a lot, and I don't know how people get their brushes to like.
I think it's a dry brush on certain kind of paper.
And I don't know if it's also like maybe some people are better at cleaning their brush throughout their workday, and I tend to just go for like 4 hours straight, and then I'll wash the brush and take a break.
Yeah.
So like I'm not maybe maintaining it well, but yeah, I work with a watercolor brush in the India ink on Bristol paper, pretty standard.
Pretty standard, and but how do you? Because what I always find difficult with the brush that you don't have a.
The point is not consistent.
Yes, and with the pen, your distance is always set because your pen touches the paper and gives you a feedback, and the brush doesn't because it's just hair. Like, how do you learn that thing? Or
that's
how?
Interesting.
Oh, I never thought of that before. Well, I've never been successful with a nib because maybe the angle I hold my pen or my grip and the way I move my hand, like the scratch of a nib, I can't do it. Every time I've tried a nib, I can't successfully do it with the way I move my hand. And a brush feels very natural to me, especially if you're making a bigger gesture.
Yeah. Have you always worked with the brush? Was it from the get-go?
Yeah, from my first book, Goodbye Chunky Rice. How do you say it?
Yeah, Mascoot.
Mascoot. But of course, with this book, like, it's kind of, I was inspired by Charles Burns and that very clean line, laboring over the clean line. I don't know if that's a good page. It's not really a good page there, but
we will show it afterwards.
And also, I'm 23 when I made this book. I guess I worked on it ages 21 to 23, and I was most influenced by people like Jay Stevens and Charles Burns, who had a really clean, precise brush line. But ultimately, that style doesn't really make sense with a brush because a brush is a more organic tool, and you're working so hard to make it crisp.
But you probably had this training because.
But it was good to learn the control.
Your backgrounds, I couldn't draw these backgrounds in brush because it's so difficult to get the steadiness, and that it's not just like all the chaotic variation of lines. And I think maybe that was your basic training for the.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because it took me a long a long time to figure out how to be controlled and precise with the brush.
Yeah, because I think the more a medium is chaotic, the more control is actually necessary to get it to master it.
Yeah.
With watercolor, it's the same. Like it's watercolor is the medium for control freaks because it's so chaotic.
That is interesting. Yeah, you're right.
And brushes, I think it's the same.
Yeah, I don't think I'm using a brush the way you're supposed to. I mean, I remember thinking that with Habibi because I was looking at Gustave Doré engravings. I was like, oh, this is mostly influenced by engravings. Well, this is maybe an exception where I got to be more brushy with that page because it's an organic landscape. But when I'm doing all these insane patterns, I did with a brush too, which is a crazy person behavior. Let's see if I can find one. Well.
So basically, you're like, I have one tool and do everything with that one tool.
Yeah, which is, I mean, with Ginseng Roots, I started to use sometimes with these really crazy crowd scenes, like something like this. Here's a Foxconn, factory. Sorry.
With Donald.
Yeah, and there's just so much detail. Most of that was lettered with like a micron or drawn with a micron pen.
Okay.
Because it's so tiny and detailed on that page.
Yeah, there's a limit.
Yeah, there's limits once you But going back to Joe Sacco and what an influence he is, I mean, when I see his pages and the amount of detail he can squeeze on a page, I'm very envious. And it's only because he uses a nib.
Yeah.
You can't do that, I don't think, with a brush at level of detail.
Yeah, these two tools, I think they have really two complete different languages. And there's people that combine them, and I don't know how they do. Because it's almost like thinking differently.
And I wouldn't want to be disrupted. When I'm inking with a brush, I'm just in that flow of inking everything. So if I had to put down one tool or clean one tool and switch to another, I think it would disrupt the flow.
Stop the flow,
yeah.
Okay. Greg, thank you so much for your time and for visiting us and give us this great conversation.
Yeah,
it goes in a, I don't know what I've expected, but I'm very happy with that. So thank you so much, and I hope.
And if you want to learn more about Wisconsin and Ginseng, give it a read.
And the author.
Good luck with the start of the release here in Germany.
Thank you, Buchmesse.
Buchmesse, yeah.
Tonight.
Yeah, and buy the book, and we see us on the next Comic Sans YouTube show, whatever it's will happen. We don't know exactly, but thank you so much.
Greg. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
They're busting unions in Wisconsin and praising Jesus in the schools. They're keeping science in the basement, speaking tongues and making fools.